How's everybody doing? Good? Thumbs up? Awesome. All right, folks, we'll jump in and get after it. Couple announcements, questions for folks. How's research going? People jumping on, starting to get invitations for more studies and stuff like that. Awesome, cool. Go through, again, you've got all semester to go through and get that stuff knocked out of the way. But getting on it early and getting those out. Remember, 6 is required. I'll credit you up to 9, and then if you don't miss any appointments, if you don't have any unexcused no-shows, I'll throw a couple extra points, just good citizen points your way. So make sure that you're keeping track of all that stuff. SI session, how did SI session go? Anybody able to attend SI last night? Okay, Brooke, good, I get a thumbs up there. Yeah, if you can make those sessions, go through, do it. Samantha's got some great materials there. Again, we'll have, I guess, quiz 3 in a week. So that's going to be next Wednesday. Seems like maybe a ways off, but always a good idea to get started on this stuff early. Taking notes, making sure that you're not trying to force yourself to cram everything at the last minute. Okay. Quick, Cade, was it you that had questions last time about neurogenesis and stem cells in the brain? No. Someone did. I can't remember who it was. Someone had a question about that. But went through, consulted with one of my colleagues who does neuros types of stuff, and looks like neurogenesis and plasticity is kind of a different thing than stem cells for most of the brain. Again, your brain, if you damage it, particularly if you're an adult, there's some ability in some areas to go through and repair some growth there. Again, the difference, remember, in neurogenesis is the development of new neurons. Neuroplasticity is just kind of remaking connections and strengthening certain connections over the top of other connections. But it does look like there are some adult stem cells, specifically in areas of the limbic system. I'll go through and post an article that Meredith found talking about some of this stuff. But in general, think about stem cells and as kind of a different issue, although it does pop in sometimes. Someone have a question? Oh, yeah.
Dr. Clapp,
Yeah.
isn't it kind of rare, though, for that to have any effect on recovery from serious brain injuries?
Oh, okay. I was trying to figure out. Yeah, Court. Yeah. This is the thing with serious head trauma. it's always kind of a question on what trajectory is going to be. It's very hard, particularly in the immediate aftermath of a trauma, to say with 100% certainty that this will happen and that or that will happen. You'll hear stories about how, a doctor said, oh, this person is likely to have serious cognitive deficits based on these injuries, and that person goes on to be recover quite well. That happens a lot. It's just really, really hard to tell what the impacts are when you've got such a complex system like the brain and you start to damage parts of it. Again, we just don't know enough about it to sort of give good, solid prognosis. We can say pretty likely if you go through and you damage, again, let's say the left hemisphere fairly severely, the left temporal, you're probably going to have problems with language to some degree. Now, the extent to which it'll happen, it's hard to tell. And if you have deficits that have continued on for, if you're an adult, it's been 6 months, a year, probably after that point, you're not going to get much more in terms of sort of repairing sort of the actual damage. And so this is what we do when we're working in neuropsych fields, applied stuff. A lot of this is helping people develop compensatory strategies to go through and work around stuff. So let's say I've had a bad head injury, and so I'm really struggling with managing day-to-day activities that require me to remember things, to go places, complete tasks and stuff like that. Part of what we would do with some occupational therapy, rehab types of stuff would be helping give me things to put in place that help me navigate my life, even though I do have a cognitive deficit. And this is something, having sort of spent some time doing some of this stuff, I do this for myself. Like things fly out of my head immediately. Like I got the whole absent-minded professor thing. Like if I'm not talking about it, I'm thinking about something else and it'll go. It's really tough. My wife is awesome. She can sort of keep schedules and things like that in her head. I'm really, really terrible about it, right? So, but I've got things like I put my keys in the same spot every time, because if I don't, I'll completely lose that. I've got sort of certain routines and things that I have to do to try and impose structure, because I'm not a structured, organized person in general, right? So we can all do these types of things. It just starts to become more important for people who have had either experiencing age-related cognitive decline or some sort of trauma or insult to the brain that sort of has impacted stuff. But yeah, once you get into adulthood, it starts to become, there's some healing and stuff that'll go on, but if you've had some deficits for a while, the likelihood of that going away with continued time is probably not great. Other questions about...
Does anybody do that same thing with their glasses? It's like, if I put my glasses in the wrong spot and I don't remember, I'll never find them.
Yeah. No, I do this.
I have such bad eyesight, I won't be able to find them.
Yeah, no, I do this. I'll be like, oh, I'm going to put this here so I don't forget it. And then I will immediately forget that. I'll remember that I put it somewhere that I thought was good because I would remember it, and then I'm never going to remember it. And if someone moves my stuff, if my wife will take my keys, I get really agitated. I'm like, oh no, what happened to them? Because I think I've lost them and they're gone forever, right? But these are just different types of organizational skills that you can and are good to do to help keep you on track in things. When we're working with individuals with who struggle with attention deficit stuff, one of the big things is time management, organization, to try and put in some structure to help sort of move forward. And so a lot of different applications for that. All right. Any other questions about material, where we're going before we jump into new stuff for today? Okay, cool. All right. So we had finished up last time talking about early physical development in children. We had talked about continued synaptic pruning. Again, this is just the process by where the brains of infants start to become more efficient. Those connections that they're using a lot for different things start to become strengthened. Those that are used less often start to become weaker. Again, we don't need all neurons in the brain to be connected with all things. That's not efficient. So we see this synaptic pruning, and this continues through young adulthood. We also see some pretty systematic changes in motor development. Okay. And what we see, and again, this is people get really worked up about sort of where's my kid sort of in terms of relative to other kids. Huge variability in how children progress through some of these motor stages. Now, if you're super delayed, that's not good, but people will say, oh, like by this time you should be doing X, Y, or Z, or someone gets to us doing something a little bit sooner than they should, kind of make a big deal about it. It's fine, you're proud of your kid, but there's a lot of variability here. But what's interesting is what we see in general, right, is that young children and infants physically develop in terms of motor abilities in a series of stages. We first see babies start to be able to roll around, right? And then they're able to sit and then crawl and then walk. It's rare that we see like, oh, I'm a child and I'm rolling around. I've got that mastered, and then I jump straight to walking, right? Kids can sort of start to it's like, oh, maybe I, was rolling and then crawling ish sometimes. But what we typically see in terms of development is kind of going through this stage and this stage and this stage, and we kind of hit these milestones, okay? Now, when we're thinking about these stages of physical development, some of it's biological, a lot of it's biological. What you can do at a given age is constrained by just your physical capabilities. If I'm a 6-month-old baby, I'm not going to be sprinting around the house, right? Because I can't. Like, my body's not able to handle that. A lot of this involves continued brain development. At sort of say 2-3 months, you still have there's cerebellum, right? That part of your hindbrain that helps with balance and coordination and stuff like that. That's not developed. Like, I don't have the muscle tone or the sort of brain capacity to be able to sprint around the room at 3 months, right? And so sometimes parents will get sort of worked up about maybe push kids to try and do things that they just physically can't do. All right. But on the other hand, the environment has a big impact on this as well. If I have a child who I don't interact with and I don't play with, and I just sit on the ground and ignore, we're going to see huge delays in physical development and activity, right? You have kids who definitely should be crawling who aren't able to sit up, right? And so having this engaged environment where babies are getting or infants are getting attention and interaction and things along these lines starts to become important, not just for psychological development, but physical development as well. So again, you can think about this as another interaction of biology and environment. If I've got a young child and I'm sort of playing with, if I got a kid and I'm playing with them and sort of doing stuff, they're going to probably develop at a normal pace, but I can't push them to play baseball at age 1 because they're not going to be able to do that, right? I'm being constrained by biology. It doesn't matter what my environment looks like, but also biology is just not going to take over unless we have an adaptive environment for kids to work in. So again, sort of these two things working hand in hand. All right. So this is physical development. We think about physical development occurring in, a series of stepped stages, sequential stages that most kids follow through. And early on, right, we had psychologists starting to wonder, what about cognitive development? Now, if you hear cognition, this is just a fancy psychology term for any type of mental process, right? Attention, memory, reasoning, learning, comprehension, thinking, right? If you see cognition, you should just say thinking, right? And so cognitive psychologists are professionals who go through and look at different aspects of thinking and experience and things like this, right? But one of the first people to really start to formulate ideas and a theory about how children start to develop mental processes is going to be Jean Piaget. Okay, anybody here heard it? Give me a shout out if you've heard of Piaget before. Keely, okay. Who else? Anybody else? Okay, Colin, Court. I'm limited in the number of people I can scroll through. So, but people have heard of Piaget. Okay, you know what? People love Piaget. Like Piaget is like people's big sort of favorite. A lot of folks really into Piaget. today, Piaget's cognitive theory of cognitive development, a lot of aspects of it don't stand up to empirical rigor, but as like a lot of the people who we'll talk about and theories we'll talk about over the course of this semester, a lot of this is thinking about sort of giving recognition to people who started to think about things and asking the right questions and putting things together, right? So Piaget's stage theory of cognitive development kind of built from this idea of, okay, we're seeing kids physically develop through different sequential stages. Can we apply the development of certain cognitive abilities to this same kind of stage model or stage idea, right? And so Piaget came up, working with a developmental psychologist, working with a lot of young children, came up with a model of cognitive development. And Piaget, the basic premise is that as kids develop, they hit certain milestones, certain stages where they're able to do certain things that are characteristic of a given stage. So, if we're thinking about the first stage of Piaget's theory, Piaget identified this as a sensory motor stage. Okay, at this stage, children infants are starting to understand their physical environment through interactions. Okay, what we see here is kids going through touching, grabbing, grasping. Think about if you have or grew up with that you remember a very young brother or sister, or had nieces and nephews, or cousins who were very young. What are kids doing about age 1, 2? They're just moving, they're grabbing, they're sort of trying to kill themselves a lot, right? So sort of trying to fall off edges, pull things on top of them, like anything that they find into the mouth immediately, right? But from Piaget's perspective, or from Piaget's theory, this is how this child is trying to learn about the environment, learning rules, boundaries, things along these lines. And a key feature of the sensory motor stage is this idea of object permanence. Okay, so in very young children, infants, right? I'm doing, who do I want to bring on? Finn, you want to play a fun game with me? Okay, ready? Watch this. I'm here. You see me in the screen? Yeah. Oh, look at that. What happened? I'm gone. I disappeared. Oh, I'm back. Oh, that's pretty cool. Right? Ah! I'm gone again. Now I'm back. Right? Finn probably isn't going to enjoy this game for very long. The novelty is going to wear off pretty quick, right? But if I'm working with a 1-year-old, that's a hilarious game, right? Because what we see for kids at this level haven't established this idea of object permanence, this idea that even if I can't see something, that thing is still there, right? So for a child who hasn't yet achieved object permanence, put my hands over my face, I'm gone, right? They can't see that, right? But it's one of the sort of primary characteristics of the sensory motor stage. What we start to see, again, if I have sort of this, and I'm like, oh, look at this thing, and I put it behind my back so they can't see it, kids will start to look for it, right? They start to recognize that they know it's there, they just can't see it, right? And so again, this starts to get at this this object permanence. Before this, out of sight, out of mind. If I can't see it, it's not there. Object permanence starts to recognize that things still exist even if I can't see them. Okay. Questions about sensory motor stage? Okay. Second stage, going to be pre-operational stage. What we see with this somewhere around ages 2 to 7. Again, don't worry about trying to memorize age of each one of these stages. Kind of know the order and what they're doing. You don't have to remember sort of actual formal ages. Okay, but what we see at Piaget's pre-operational stage is this idea of the formulation of basic mental concepts. Okay, we start to see symbolism, language, some imaginative play in kids in this area. And a couple of key features or things we start to see in the pre-operational stage is this egocentric perspective. Okay, what this means, if I'm a 3-year-old, okay, who Jacob, I'll pick on you. All right. Jacob, can you show me your notes right now? I see you're writing on something. Can you hold your notes up to your camera? Okay. Awesome. Jacob, you can put those down. You know what? Jacob has progressed past the pre-operational stage because when Jacob shared his notes with me, he put the writing to the camera so that I could see them, right? For children in the pre-operational stage, what we see is this egocentric perspective. And I have my notes here, and Jacob, if you asked to see my notes and I'm 3, what might happen is I might do this. I can't see. Right? You can't. What did I do there?
Held it upside down.
Yeah, well, kind of held it upside down. My camera flips things around. I showed you when I was showing you my notes. There was no text on the back of the page. It wasn't like this, like Jacob did. I did this, right? Because if I'm in the pre-operational stage, I can see these notes, right? And if I can see these notes, I assume that you can see these notes because I'm seeing them. Everybody could see them, right? It's so there's this egocentric perspective, right? This idea that if it's something that I can see or do, that must be true for everybody. And if you've worked with or been around little kids a lot of the times, you'll see some of this stuff. We also see animism being a feature of this stage. This is going to be involving assigning human traits to things that are not human, right? So if I'm 3, right, what I might find is if I fall down on the floor, I'm mad at the floor, right? I'll say, the floor hurt me, right? Now, the floor didn't do anything. The floor was just the floor. I fell down, right? But in this stage of cognitive development, I start to assign traits to that floor that are human, right? Or I might say, the sun's going down, the sun's going to sleep, right? I'm starting to sort of develop concepts and think about things in a way, but a lot of it involves assigning human characteristics to inanimate objects and things. Okay. So again, this is where we also start to see, again, a lot of imaginative play, right? Sort of I'm being creative, I'm imagining things, I'm sort of having these scenarios going on in my mind. Not something we see much evidence of before this pre-operational stage. Questions about this? Another thing too we'll see for example, the egocentric perspective, right? Let's say I'm looking down here and Madison, let me see. Madison's giving me stink eye. You're not, but let's say you are, right? And I get embarrassed, right? What I might do is I might do this, right? I shut my eyes, right? Because if I shut my eyes, I can't see Madison. That means Madison can't see me, right? You see small children, like I'm hiding, right? Well, you're not. You're still there, right? But this idea of this egocentric perspective, if I can't see anybody, no one else can see me. Kind of another example or illustration of that principle. All right. Another thing, in pre-operational stage, if you've ever been around kids of this age, why, how come, why, what is that, why? And it doesn't take too long until you like 4 of those questions you kind of tapped out your knowledge, right? It's humbling because you're like, I don't know why, just because it is. I don't know. That's life, you know. But again, kids at this age just sponges, just trying to soak up information, learn things about stuff. Okay. So once we get past that, we in Piaget's theory get into concrete operational stage. Well, we start here from about ages 7 to 11. See children start to be able to manipulate objects and ideas in a logical fashion. Okay, we're starting to move beyond just imagining and things along those lines, starting to put things together in a more logical, systematic way. And so we'll see some things in this stage of cognitive development, seriation. Okay, anybody know what seriation is? Oops. I guess this. Okay, if we're talking about seriation, this is putting things in order. Okay, what I've done at this stage, I'm starting to be able to identify certain things, objects, right? And put them in some sort of order, right? If I have blocks that are, so let's say I have alphabet blocks, what I can do is I can start putting these in alphabetical order. I know what order the alphabet goes in, and I can start putting these in order. Same thing with numbers. I can start putting these in sequential order, starting to go through and order things by some sort of characteristic, right? Maybe size or something along those lines, okay? We also see classification, right? We see kids in this stage being able to go through and identify different classes of things. So these are all my trucks, right? So I've got a bunch of cars, right? So a lot of toy cars. I'm going to put these together as trucks, these together as cars, and these together as dump trucks or something like that. I don't know, right? So what we're starting to see is kids starting to mentally be able to form this idea of groups and starting to put things together systematically, consistent with that. We also see kids at this stage start to be able to build a concept of conservation. Okay. Now, I remember this happening to me. You maybe remember it happening to you. Let's say, Michael, I've got some juice, right? And you and Colin both want some juice. And so I pour some juice into a fat, short glass for you, and I pour juice for Colin into a tall, skinny glass. You're mad at me. Why?
Because it looks like the tall, skinny glass has more.
Yeah, exactly. You're mad because Colin got more juice than you, right? And I can, before this concrete operational stage, I can try and tell you, stop freaking out. It's the same amount. You're getting upset over nothing. But before this, I can't wrap my head around that. I can see very clearly that Colin has more juice than me because his level is higher than mine, right? What we start to see in concrete operational stage, children start to be able to say, okay, it's the same amount, it's just in different shape, and so I'm fine with this, okay? We also start to see a better able to perspective take, okay? Again, this gets out of sort of this egocentric approach, which continues on to some extent through adolescence or adulthood or old age for some people, right? But this idea that I can sort of take the perspective of someone else, I can stand in someone else's shoes to be able to go through and say, okay, this is what they're feeling, right? And so a child in this age is probably much better able to grasp, at least sort of at a conceptual level, why we don't hit other people and take their things, right? Because if someone did that to me, I would be very sad about that. And so starting to be able to take that perspective taking a little bit more. We also see inductive reasoning, okay? This is a very basic, think about inductive reasoning. This is bottom-up type of reasoning. And so what we're doing is with bottom-up reasoning, we're taking something specific and generalizing it to sort of bigger things, okay? So for example, let's say I'm 7, right? And I know that my mom goes through and waters all the plants in the house once a week. And I say, why do we water? Why do you water the plants? Well, we need to water our plants so that they don't die, right? If I'm engaging in inductive reasoning, what I might do is say, okay, the plants in our house need to have water so they don't die. Therefore, probably, I'm guessing that all plants need water so they don't die. So we're taking something very specific and generalizing it to sort of everything else, right? Which is a good and important sort of form of reasoning. But we see inductive reasoning, this bottom-up reasoning, sometimes we'll run into problems, okay? So maybe I say, I live in a house, in a traditional like sort of house, like storybook house. I live in a house. I'm a kid. Therefore, all kids live in houses, right? Again, it's an example of inductive reasoning. I'm taking something specific and generalizing it out, but we just run into problems sometimes because the specifics don't always generalize to other people, but kids in the concrete operational stage can sometimes have a hard time sort of managing or understanding some of that stuff. Question about concrete operational.
Dr. Clapp, I have a question.
Yeah.
Does the stage that children develop and grow in these stages, can there be something that, like speed it up or halt it?
Kind of the same thing, Michael, with what we were talking about, physical maturation, right? We are sort of born with certain constraints. Some kids are going to pick stuff up faster than other kids, right? And that's just the way it's going to go, right? But again, if I'm engaged, let's say that I've got, my family tolerates my why questions, right? And they take me seriously and they try and explain things. What that's going to do is I'm going to start to sort of understand things a little bit more. It's going to increase my verbal ability. I might sort of start to get a handle on complex ideas more quickly than if I'm ignored and not talked to and just sit in front of like a video game or something along those lines, right? So environment can help. But if you say, okay, I'm going to have my kid be a super genius, let's say, Michael, what's your major?
I don't have a major.
You know, okay, you know what? How about this? Let's say you're a physics major. That's what we're going to say for today, right? Congratulations, I just made that decision for you, right? So let's say like you're a professor, you're a physicist, and you're like, oh, I'm going to teach my 6-year-old physics. No, you're not. Like, it's not going to happen because they just don't have the capacity to do that, right? And so, yes, environment does have an impact to a point. We're going to have some limits on stuff, right? And so, again, this is kind of nature and nurture. I mean, like, sometimes I think about this in terms of, like, say, athletics, right? You can, at a young age, with a lot of practice, right, in whatever specific sports you want, get quite good and talented at doing something. But that doesn't mean that any kid I pluck off the street and sort of give tennis lessons to is going to the Olympics, right? There has to be some innate capacity, some athleticism, right? I will never be in the Olympics for tennis, like no matter how hard you would have tried to teach me, because I'm not a coordinated human, right? So it's sort of this combination of biology, genetics, and sort of stuff that I'm born with, and then sort of opportunities in the environment. So this is a thing, like at some point, right? So there's a huge marketing to like, oh, baby Einstein, teach your kid to do calculus at 4, that type of stuff, right? Which will start to prey on very anxious parents, right? Who don't want their kids to be behind. I don't know, like just talk to your kids and play with them and interact with them. That's probably going to be redo them. That's important. That's going to be probably do just as much as sort of the other stuff that you're doing, right? Without having to pay $1 billion. Yeah.
I did have a question on the concrete operational stage.
Yeah, what's that, Cade?
To inductive reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
So would that also apply to, say, kids who live in high crime areas are more likely to believe that crime's just a normal occurrence everywhere?
Yeah, and that starts to get into some culture issues, this starts to get into culture issues and how people react to certain things. So, you could think about that. I hadn't thought about that, but you could think about that as an inductive reasoning, right? Like, so people's houses or people's cars are getting stolen in my neighborhood all the time. And so all neighborhoods have people. That's just something that happens, right? And it starts to get into an interesting question related to, resilience versus, so I mean, because if it's something that just happens all the time to me and it's not really all that, it's pretty common, like I might not get super shaken up about it, right? Or does it happen to somebody else? Someone else might get pretty freaked out by that. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, I think you could use that as an example of inductive reasoning. Nice work, Cade.
Yeah, I just learned about it in juvenile justice before, but they didn't really dive into it very much.
Okay, yeah. That would be sort of a kind of a simplistic sort of way to, if I'm 10, and I think that sometimes people get robbed. Like that's just everybody gets robbed. That's just something that happens. I'm not jazzed about it, but like it's just part of the world, right? And so, but what we would see then is we start to get higher up, right? And so to start to get, and Piaget stopped right at about 12 and up, right? So people with 12 and older, that's all kind of a pretty homogenous group there. But thinking about formal operations, this is where we start to get abstract reasoning and complex use of some different symbols. Okay, what we see here is like a lot of algebra. Like think about, like, remember the first time you were in algebra, right? And so I've got this whole sort of arithmetic thing under control, but now all of a sudden you're throwing letters at me, and letters are numbers, right? This would be a hard thing for children. There's a reason we don't teach, first graders algebra, because they haven't sort of developed the capacity to go through it and do this in general. Not to say that some first graders couldn't, maybe, but in general, kids aren't able to do this. And we also see a switch or an addition into not just bottom-up reasoning, but also top-down reasoning or deductive reasoning. If inductive reasoning is taking something specific and applying that to the general, what we would deductive reasoning is going to be taking something that's very general and bring it down to the specific. So, for example, deductive reasoning, you might learn in class, right? Because you're 12, that mammals are warm-blooded, right? So I know that sort of if mammals are warm-blooded, right? Okay, that's a fact that I learned. I know that my dog is a mammal, therefore what? What's that?
They have warm blood.
Yep, absolutely. Perfect, Lindsay. Yep. So I'm taking something from the general, mammals are warm-blooding, and bringing it down to the specific. And so this type of reasoning tends to be more sound than the inductive bottom-up reasoning. But what we're seeing prior to, at least in Piaget's theory, prior to age 12, or sort of before kids hit this formal operational stage, sort of having trouble with this, sort of taking something big and generalizing it down to the specific. Okay. Questions about Piaget's theory?
I had a question.
Yeah, Michael.
So, like when you hear them stories about like the child geniuses or whatnot, the kids who are obviously doing like super good or super ahead of their time, is it more of like they have a biological thing, or are they kind of being forced through their environment to go through these stages at a faster rate?
I would say that's probably more like a biological type of thing, right? In that some people are born with really kind of rare and interesting capabilities that kind of fall on the bounds of that normal functioning, right? And so if you are talking about some child prodigy, right, who got their like 2 bachelor's degrees by the time they're 12 or something along those lines, right? If you took me and tried to get me through a bachelor's program by the time I was 12, you couldn't have done that. I'm just not capable of doing sort of that level of stuff. But we do have really kind of unique individuals who are able to go through and do that. Now, again, I think sports is a good example, right? Like you can go to camps and coaches and sort of do sort of different types of things, and I can sort of get pretty good, and I might even be pretty good for my high school or my sort of middle school or whatever I'm doing, right? But at some point, when you get into sort of the professional level, you have to have some basic ability going on there, right? Like the training, the work. Rudy's a great story, but sometimes when we're looking at those really high levels, there needs to be some stuff going on there too, right? So yeah, I would think about stories about those prodigies, and some of those examples is more kind of a people were kind of born with sort of really incredible talent. Does that help?
Yeah. Thank
Cool.
you.
All right. Any other questions about Piaget? All right. So again, from a database standpoint, some problems with Piaget's sort of theory and his stages, and this idea that we sort of have concrete, discrete sort of phases that we're going through. But again, what we do see is, I mean, the observations aren't bad. We do see kids start to progress through different capabilities, and sort of kids in a general age range will generally be able to do certain types of things. And if you can't, and if it's super delayed, then that starts to suggest that something might not be so great. But again, sort of the idea that children do develop cognitively and starting able to hit sort of different milestones is probably the strength of Piaget's theory, and be able to sort of organize this in a way that makes some sense. All right. Other thing we want to think about in terms of development in kids, not just thinking ability, but also social development. Okay. How do we as humans sort of start to learn how to interact and get along with people? Humans are fundamentally social individuals. Okay. We do, now there's individual differences, but sort of it's rare to find someone who is better off all alone with no contact with sort of any individual at all, right? And through some animal-based experiments and some unfortunate sort of real-life situations, sort of our literature in psychology starts to point to evidence about the importance of social development. Research looking at sort of familiarity, right? Lawrence's ducklings is a big and sort of imprinting kind of one of these staples of intro psych textbooks talking about familiarity. Can someone tell me what was going on with Lawrence's ducklings?
So, if I can remember correctly, looking after they imprinted on him.
Yeah.
And they just followed him around.
Yeah, right. So we had an investigator sort of watching ducks and noticing how ducklings follow mother duck, right? Just sort of in a line, sort of right behind, and follow mother duck around wherever mother duck is going to go, right? And so doing some experiments saying, oh, this is what we do as scientists, be like, oh, hey, can I mess with that, right? Took ducklings, right, and started to see what types of things these ducklings would imprint on, right? And what they found is it's actually pretty easy to imprint ducklings onto things, right? If they're around something familiar, humans, sort of toys, things along those lines, you can get ducklings to start sort of following things around. And so, in terms of like humans don't imprint sort of like birds do, but starting to think about using animal research to start thinking about the importance of familiarity, right? And sometimes it's hard to understand why people make the interpersonal choices that they do, or choose to be in, or remain in relationships that sort of might not seem great for them. But this impact or this influence of familiarity is really, really strong, right? If something feels familiar to me, I'm going to tend to be gravitating towards that type of thing. Okay. So, what's up, Colin? What's that?
Do smarter animals get affected by the Hawthorne effect, or monkeys and stuff?
What? That's sort of that's going to be a higher level cognitive thing. I'm not sure if people have looked at I don't know. Let me get back to you on that, Colin. Okay? Well, hold on to this. But you want to talk about monkeys? We're going to talk about monkeys. What about Harlow's monkeys? Colin, do you know about Harlow's monkeys? You don't know about Harlow's monkeys. Anybody know about Harlow's monkeys?
Isn't this where he deprived the monkeys of like maternal caregiving and companionship and things like that?
Well, yeah, if you want to put it that way, Brooklyn. yeah, that's exactly what he did, right? What they were doing originally is trying to go through and do some like nature nurture types of stuff, right? And wanting to do some learning research to say, okay, let's sort of look at this. But what we're going to do is we're going to use primates, we're going to use monkeys, but we don't want these monkeys to be influenced by sort of their mom and sort of upbringing and stuff like that. So what we want to do is we're going to take these baby monkeys and we're going to raise them separately from the mother monkey, so there's no interference. So these are like just straight up tabula rasa, blank slate monkeys with no inadvertent learning from the mother. Okay, but what happens when you take small monkeys and raise them without a mother? You get weird monkeys that don't behave like monkeys should behave, right? And what they saw is they started to have saw these monkeys who were raised. And again, this sort of gets into sort of problematic ethical issues with animal stuff, particularly primates. Is they had these terry cloth blankets in with these baby monkeys, and these baby monkeys got incredibly attached to these blankets. And so, as happens sometimes, we're looking at this question, and then we go off in a different direction because we see something that's more interesting than what we were originally interested in looking at, right? And so, at the time, the idea was that children develop connections with parents because parents provide food, shelter, sort of that type of thing, right? Mom gives me food, and that's why I'm attached to mom, is because that's a source of food. Food is a basic need, and that's why we see that level of connection. But what they found with these monkeys is setting up experiments where they have, again, here, surrogate mom monkey that has maybe like a kind of monkey faced head-ish thing, but has milk attached to the food. Or we have terry cloth mom that looks much more sort of like a monkey and is warm and cozy and comforting, right? And so the question is which surrogate mom will these monkeys prefer? Will they prefer the cold sort of wire mom statue that has food, or will they prefer the one who's has some warmth, comfort, and looks more like an actual sort of monkey, right? And the idea is that they're going to choose the food every time, each and every time, because that's nourishment, right? But what they found was that these baby monkeys much preferred the comfort wire cloth or the terry cloth surrogates, right? And so this research starting to sort of point to the importance of touch and comfort and sort of tactile things in development, right? So it's not just food. I can't have a kid who I just feed and like give them a roof over his head so that they don't perish, right? And just assume that that kid's going to be fine, right? We need interaction. We need socialization. And we crave that as human beings, which is one of the things that has made COVID stuff really, like a lot of people have really struggled with this, not being able to sort of connect or engage with other folks, right? Last thing we see here is some issues with some Romania, and this has happened a number of different times, but in the 70s, authoritarian regime in Romania said, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to grow the glory of Romania by taxing or penalizing people who don't have a certain number of kids. Going to penalize people who don't have a certain number of kids. You're required to have children to grow the population of Romania, grow our workforce, and we're going to outlaw birth control and abortion, not allowed. Okay. So what happens if we do this in a poor country? We get lots of kids. Is there anybody there to take care of the kids? Nope. And so what you've got is a lot of children in orphanages that no one can take care of, right? And so in these orphanages, kids had food, sort of roof over their head, but just no interactions, right? And when they came into these orphanages, what they found is kids who are 3 who can't sort of sit up or stand or crawl or things like that, right? Huge delays in terms of cognitive and physical development in the absence of human contact and interaction. Okay. Now the good news is with these situations, we see that children are very robust and able to bounce back if they've and sort of do some catching up if they sort of are taken out of these deprived situations. But what we do see on average is that we do see a greater risk for interpersonal deficits, difficulties regulating emotions. We see increased risk of different types of anxiety, depression, things along those lines, and increased risk of aggression, right? Now, this isn't to say that, like, if I grew up in an impoverished family or was neglected, that I'm destined to have some of these difficulties, but my risk is much higher than someone who might have had appropriate sort of interactions as a young person. All right. Going to switch over and finish up here quickly with attachment. Attachment, a construct, sort of generally we think about this as our emotional connection with some other individual, right? And attachment is thought to develop early on in childhood as a way to sort of how we relate to other people. And it's thought to be kind of the foundation for our development of trust, our ability to interact with other people, and sort of clarify sort of the nature of our relationships as we move into adulthood. And the classic way this was looked at, a researcher in Ainsworth developed a sort of a task that started to try to tease out attachment styles in young children. Okay, and it's called the strange situation paradigm, right? And so, when the strange situation paradigm, what we did is we brought a caregiver in with a child. Okay, so they came into the lab and set them up in a room in a two-way mirror. Researcher is on the other side watching the kid, right? And what they did is take children through a series of sort of transitions, right? So first, in the other room, we've got the parent and the child. And then we go through and take a look at, and so now all of a sudden a stranger comes into the room. So now it's a stranger, the parent, and the child. Then the parent leaves, and now we've got the stranger and the child. Then the stranger leaves, and now it's parent and child. Then parent leaves, and now it's just child. Then stranger comes back. Then parent comes back. So you don't need to worry about the specific sequence of these, right? Don't try and memorize those because it doesn't matter. The thing that you should be focusing on is what we've done is we're watching this child and how this child interacts when a parent's there, when a stranger comes into the room, when the parent leaves, when stranger's there, and looking at the child's reaction as they work through some of these different scenarios. And what Ainsworth did was start to develop this framework for identifying attachment styles based on how these children were reacting. So, first style is what we call secure style. Okay, secure attachment. We're seeing children use the caregiver as the base for exploration. So mom's here. I'm sort of willing to explore and sort of go out and look, but mom's always there. Mom's my safety sort of touchstone, right? Protests when sort of mom leaves, I'm sort of upset by that. But when mom comes back, I'm easily comforted, like, oh, mom, okay, you're good back, right? I was not happy when you left, but I'm okay now. Strangers, not sort of trusting strangers so much, but I'll warm up to them eventually. Clear preference for mom, though. Like, strangers weird. Mom, I much prefer you, right? So this is what we would see in terms of behavior, in terms of a secure attachment. Avoidant, these are kids who just seem to be not interacting with anybody, right? So here, mom comes and mom leaves. Kid doesn't seem to care a whole lot. Mom comes back. Kid kind of ignores mom. If mom goes in to go through and try and sort of pick up the child might turn away or sort of arch the back, sort of not wanting to maintain contact, and treating the stranger pretty similar as the caregiver, right? Thinking about this as mom's here, mom's not, stranger's here, stranger's not, I am not sort of attached or I'm not really willing to develop sort of a connection with sort of much of anybody. Okay. And then we have an ambivalent attachment style. Ambivalent attachment style, what we see is that this is a very much, I want you, I want you, I want you, I want you, get away from me, get away from me, get away. So kind of this sort of push-pull thing, right? So I am preoccupied with mom being here. With mom being here, if she's not attending to me, I want her, I want her, want her, want her. But then when mom tries to give me attention, then I get upset and sort of push her away and don't want her to interact with me. Mom leaves, I'm distraught, I'm very upset. But then when mom comes back, I'm angry and reluctant to sort of interact with her, and so I'm kind of holding a grudge. Strangers coming in, strangers kind of help, don't want anything to do with the stranger, not just like ignoring the stranger, but actively having a negative reaction to the stranger. Okay. And then Ainsworth had sort of a disorganized attachment style. This was just kind of an amalgamation of other stuff. This disorganized is kind of an other category, which makes it not a great system. But if it was a mix of different styles, they would label it as disorganized. Okay. And so what we see, and the idea is that these attachment styles start to set the stage for the types of relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, relationships with others, as we grow up into adulthood, right? So if I saw kids with a secure attachment in childhood, we would expect that child to be sort of pretty good with other folks, sort of moving forward in sort of relationships and things like that. I like to have people around, but I'm pretty secure in my sense of self, right? Avoidant, these are going to be our loners, or people who don't really care. So I've got people want to maybe come in and be my friend, but I'm kind of doing my own thing. Might have some problems developing strong relationships or friendships or romantic relationships. The ambivalent, this is kind of that sort of wide swings. Like, I love you, I love you, I love you, I hate you. So I want you here, I don't want you here. Be near me, stop smothering me, sort of this back and forth, more kind of turbulent type of thing. Okay. And the idea is that these attachment styles are thought to be sort of a combination of, again, like everything else we've talked about, temperament and then environment as well. So what have I grown up with, and then just kind of what type of thing am I born wired with? All right. One more comment on sort of the attachment thing that I'll get into at the start of Friday's lecture, but we'll leave it there because it sort of ran a little bit over our usual time. So if you need to take off, you go ahead and take off. We'll go through and record this. But any questions about material that we covered today? Yeah.
If you could go back to disruptions and social development, I just needed to look at that again. If you could do that.
Okay. Yeah. And Michael, remember that all of these are sort of available. The slides are all available online too, so you can go through and take a look. If you, which one were you looking at? Oh, this one? Okay, cool.
I actually had a question about this.
Okay, cool. What's up?
You had mentioned that kids who are, even when they have these disruptions, they are able to still develop back into a normal phase. Is there a point of no return for some kids, or is it really just dependent on the child?
It's hard to say. It's really hard to say, right? I mean, I think in terms of doing sort of the work that I do, number one thing to recognize is how resilient humans are. People are inherently, we can handle a lot of really negative, terrible stuff and bounce back and live normal, productive lives and be good, right? But what we do know is there is risk, right? And it looks to be, to some extent, sort of dose-response relationship, right? If I've got one thing that happens, I'll probably be able to bounce back. If I've got 2, 3, 4, if piling on continues, it starts to become hard, right? Sort of my ability to bounce back, my resilience it looks like, at least from our research, my risk for developing sort of more systematic difficulties increases, right? But you're exactly right, Michael. There's going to be some kids, and this is the thing, adults too, two individuals experience the exact same thing at the exact same time, and we could have very different outcomes depending on sort of a lot of stuff, right? A lot of it's temperament, and a lot of it's just kind of how we react to stuff. But then also, some of it's going to be later experiences, right? If I've got good corrective experiences sort of going throughout my life, that not everybody's shady, not everybody will take advantage of me, there are people who will care about me, that type of stuff can be helpful and instructive. But if I don't get that, And a lot of times the way that I've learned to interact with people based on the experiences that I've had help me survive in that situation, but they're not productive for sort of maintaining relationships, right? And if I can't sort of switch out of that, then what I can do is start to end up in some problematic cycles of behavior that thwart the potential for positive interactions and relationships down the road, right? And so we see this pop up in a lot of different clinical areas. And so definitely recognizing that these types of experiences can put people at risk for how they navigate the world or work with other folks, but also recognizing that people are hugely, hugely resilient. This type of stuff happens way more often than anybody would ever want to think or admit. But the vast majority of people in the world sort of are still able to navigate stuff pretty well.
Is it because that they're children, or they're still in can't say the word. Developmental stage.
Okay.
That they're still able to grow past this?
Well, and then you start to get into some theories that, and we'll talk about in the next slide some of Erikson's work, sort of this idea of psychosocial stages of development, where Piaget was really kind of the trendsetter for these stage theories. You get all sorts of stage theories coming out of this sort of in psychology in the mid 20th century. Erikson's stage model of psychosocial development suggested that we have certain stages of life where there are certain milestones and certain achievements that we have to achieve. And if we don't, then it's going to result in hang-ups down the road, right? Which is an interesting idea, and there's a lot of contributions of some of Erikson's work, but again, it doesn't look to be supported by the data really. There's a really kind of huge psychodynamic kind of built in, this idea that if I don't have certain emotional needs met at age 2, then I'm going to forever, as a 40-year-old professor, I'm going to have certain hang-ups with certain types of things. Doesn't look like it really works out that way. Even the stuff with attachment, child assessment of attachment in childhood kind of has some maybe association with how people sort of interact in their relationships down the road, but it's pretty weak, right? It's not this sort of one-to-one situation like everything we've talked about. It's considerably more complicated than that.
Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Does that help kind of clarify some of that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Questions.
Cool. What else? Other questions?
I had a question that was kind of similar.
Yeah.
To Michael. So a disruption in like that social interaction. Is it because we talked about how you have like an increased risk for those certain things? Is that gonna be diminished as you get older? If like an elderly person lives alone. Maybe their spouse has passed and they don't see as much of their family. Is that still going to increase then after they've already had lots of experiences with social interactions, or is it still going to increase that risk?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question, Michael. I like how you're thinking about this, right? I think it confers risk, but the risk is I would think about the risk a little bit differently. And again, if I'm working with kids who have been in families where their sort of needs haven't been met, there's sort of maybe abuse or neglect or something along those lines, right? That early formulation, like I'm a small child, I'm just, like I said, I'm an information sponge. And what I'm learning about other people is you can't trust other people. And you have to lie and steal and cheat in order to just survive and have food and get things, because if you're not, other people are going to do it and you're going to be left out in the cold, right? And so if this is my framework for how life works, right, and I haven't been exposed to anything other than that, you can see how if we're in school settings or outside relationships, if that's sort of my approach, that's going to be very, very problematic, right? And so at the developmental level, we're thinking about like how we're learning to think about relationships, interactions, and how we socialize with other people, right? I learned under one set of rules. Turns out the rest of the world's plagued by a completely different set of rules. And so I'm really struggling to figure out how to interact with people in this situation, right? And so that's kind of the developmental type of approach. From a the situation that you had given, I would say, yeah, if I was an older individual and I had a spouse pass and I didn't have a lot of connections and things, I'm also at risk for a lot of negative mental health stuff. But that's more of an issue of like, we're just social creatures. We do better when we have people around us, right? And particularly if I have grown up and I have a spouse and that's been my life and they've always been there, and now they're not, right? That changes sort of my day to day. It changes sort of how I relate to other people and sort of opportunities and stuff like that. So huge potential for a lot of, struggles with low mood, anxiety, sort of depression types of stuff, and that probably for a different reason. It's not that I don't think those older individuals don't have the capacity to sort of interact with folks. It's just my opportunities have changed. Sort of my sort of base person is maybe passed away, which is creating sort of a different kind of set of difficulties.
So then it's more of, or less of like the trust issues or the issues with thinking about how the outside world is, and more of just having that loss in your life.
Yeah. Well, it kind of depends, right? We know that sort of some of these big stressors can shake us and make us think about things in different ways, and sort of view the world in ways that sometimes are helpful and sometimes aren't helpful. And so I could see someone really being rocked by, let's say sort of I grew up sort of good home, sort of really sort of good, positive family life, but I get into middle age and let's say, I'm going to take your scenario, switch it around a little bit. Let's say I lose a child, okay, to an accident or something like that. I can see it would be possible for someone to start to look in the world in a way that was sort of very different than they had before, kind of shaking sort of those basic assumptions of how the world works, and then having that impact now how they relate to other people, trust and things along those lines, right? But it really kind of depends on sort of that individual. It's all, the potential for negative outcomes are huge regardless, but exactly what's driving sort of some of those deficits, it is going to depend on the individual.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. These are all good questions. This is, I don't know. I kind of like the Zoom thing because normally we'd be in a classroom where we'd have to leave because someone else is coming out. But it's cool to get questions. You guys are obviously thinking about this in a deep way. So any other questions before I turn you all loose? Okay, cool. Nice work. We'll jump in, just finish up with that last sort of quick comment on attachment and then jump into adolescence on Friday. Okay, awesome. All right, we'll see you